de-alignment is a little bit more complicated. Party de-alignment has to do with a lack of loyalty. So rather than realigning and going and voting for, like going from Republican to Democrat, it's this trend of moving towards independence. It's not liking the party anymore. It's voting Republican in one election and then Democrat in the next, and then Republican and then Democrat. It's voting based on people instead of party. Since, if we go back here to when I was talking earlier on these dates, if we go back here and look at these presidents, I'm just going to go LBJ forward, or let's just go Nixon forward. Let's go 1968 forward. Do you know that not a single one of these presidents, really listen to what I'm saying, not a single one of them has had their party control the legislature for more than 2 years, except for W. What does that mean? So when we elect Reagan in 1980, and he won like a lot. It was a significant election. Tons of electoral votes. He won. It was a good feeling. He has a Republican majority. And then in 1982, in the midterm election, his party loses control of one of the chambers of the Congress. Riley, what do you think?
People become dissatisfied with what they've been doing for the past 2 years, and maybe they'll vote their party or a different party in hopes that like maybe that party will fix it since this party couldn't. So it comes from like just like well, maybe a change will work since we changed it already.
Potentially, that could be it. Just that always thinking, well, maybe a change. Maybe the other party will do better. Vikram, what were you going to say?
Just like new problems, so there's like new ways that people want to solve them. It could be coming from another party.
And that could definitely be true. The scope of our government has widened significantly. And so, like, the parties are having to take positions on things that maybe they haven't taken positions on before. But the reality is that we are super fickle. Let me kind of just give you a story and put this into context for you. I love to tell this story. So, when my husband and I were dating, I took him to visit my grandmother, and I took him to like a big family thing in Oklahoma City. And my grandma has tons of sisters, so I always grew up around all these great aunts that are really loud. And there were 12 of them, and there are 11 females, and there was one brother. And they were probably unusual for the time in that my great grandmother was pretty political, like she was involved in local politics, and like they've all just talked politics all the time. You cannot be with my grandmother and hear for more than a span of 5 minutes and not have her talk about the Democratic Party. And she is a Democrat, like believes Democrat. Whether or not she agrees with what they say is completely different. She has a bumper sticker on her car in the 80s, or in her 80s still talking about being a Democrat and how important that is. So I introduced my husband, who's my then boyfriend. I introduced him to my Aunt Chris. And so he says his last name, hi, I'm Ian Rosenfeld. And she goes, Roosevelt? And she starts going on and on about how great President Roosevelt was and how he saved the country, and he was the second greatest being to walk this planet. I mean, she had all kinds of, how she was Jesus Christ, she said, and then a second only. And he was so like, okay, he was kind of overwhelmed, and he just smiled and shook his head and walked away. And then later we were eating, and she starts up again about Roosevelt, blah, 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 and he had to tell her, like, I'm sorry, that's not who I am, okay? All right, so let's flash forward, and let's think about, so there is this incredible loyalty to party, whereas I promise you, if my grandmother and I sat down and we talked about the tenets of the Democratic Party, there's no way she agrees with everything that the Democrats say. But her loyalty is so intense. I've been at funerals with her, and she's leaned in and started trying to talk in politics with me about stuff. And it's so intense. My dad told me, like, in years, like, he's voted for Republicans, and she wouldn't talk to him, and it's just so okay. Okay, so then you flash forward. My parents are pretty young. Like, I was like 20, or they were 20 when they had me. So anyway. So the first presidential election that they both voted in, they voted for Richard Nixon, both of them. So they were kind of like the tail end of that Vietnam generation. I want you to imagine being a person of that generation versus a person of my parents' generation. My grandparents. So the first president you elect resigns amid this political scandal. That you're watching this incredibly unpopular televised war night after night, seeing the body count, watching the caskets come home while you're eating your TV dinner in front of TV, living through the civil rights movement, which I think most people, hopefully, would celebrate and champion. But at the time, if you were growing up in the South and you were seeing like your family and the divisions, that's a tough thing to watch, right? So you're watching all of those things. So my parents' generation is incredibly disloyal to party, right? Like they're the turning point. So what is different in that 30-year period from the 1930s to the 1960s? Why did my grandparents' generation, why did that breed loyalty to party, whereas the critical election around 1968 has bred such disloyalty? What's different? Caroline, do you have any thoughts? No? Why?
I think maybe because back then they were kind of party focused, and now they're more focused on the individual. So the individual is what could turn someone away from the party.
Okay, 100% true. Our shift from party focus to candidate focus is a big component of this.
There's also the idea about access to information, and I mean, especially like even more recently, like everything that the government does, like you can learn about instantly, and so you don't really hear about the effects of what they do as, like, it's more like instantaneous, so you form your instant opinion, and I guess maybe that breeds more disloyalty and not hearing about the overall aspects, like each individual thing that happens.
Absolutely. And not only the rate at which we get that information, but also what we choose to cover. You guys, FDR was known to have mistresses, some of which lived in the White House. There is great speculation that Eleanor Roosevelt had relationships with women of a romantic nature. FDR had polio, and think about the pictures you've seen of him sitting in a car. Like, he couldn't drive, but he's sitting in a car with the dog, all like regal and whatever. The government, the media didn't portray that. They didn't show us all of those things. So the relationship between the media and the government from the 1930s to the 1960s is going to change significantly. So what they're reporting on now, not only is it the speed, but you guys, it's what they choose to focus on. Can you imagine if President Trump did some of those things and the media would just ignore it? If he decided, I'm going to move my first wife back into the White House too, and, I'm just going to, like, where all my wives are going to live. Can you imagine what that would be like? I mean, just to give you a contrast, you guys, in 1980, Ronald Reagan was the first president ever elected that was divorced. And it was a huge scandal. Is that okay? Well, we knew that. But seriously, mistresses, illegitimate children, I mean, like, think about all the things that we now know, but we didn't report on it. Whereas it was a big consideration, is it okay to elect someone who's been divorced and very happily remarried?
Aren't there still discussions about whether or not Abraham Lincoln was either bisexual or gay?
I mean, I've heard that, yeah. I mean, I don't matter to me, but
I'm pretty sure the evidence was fake, but there might be others, so.
yeah, there's all kinds of things out there. Okay, so the relationship of the media and the government has changed. And we're going to talk next class about that. You know what? Maybe it's better because maybe now they're not hiding things that the government does. That's neither here nor there. But regardless, it is a very adversarial relationship now. Whereas before they used to like help each other and support each other. Now it's far more like combative. Riley.
I think also when you think about like what the presidents actually did and like the impact of what they did, because when you think of FDR, you think, well, FDR saved America from the Great Depression, and so obviously that hearing that, you're gonna obviously have like a positive view of like the government helps us, the government does so many good things. But when you grow up with someone like Nixon, who it seems like he basically destroyed like the American dream, and like he was this big scandal and the Vietnam War, all these things, it's like, oh, well, the government isn't good for the country, the government doesn't help us. So I think that obviously leads to like distrust.
Right, that perception. Whereas there are people that I most assuredly think that there were people during Lincoln's time that would not have ranked Lincoln as one of the greatest presidents, right? They would not have celebrated what he did or what he felt or what he believed in. LBJ, who took like massive steps to try to reconcile and fulfill the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. He's did some horrible things as well, right? But the difference is it becomes our perception. And I think you're right. In a sense, we beat the Great Depression. We reconciled after the Civil War. We didn't really win Vietnam, right? We just kind of finally left. And do you see the government winning anything? I'm not so sure anymore. Okay, so let's go back to these words. Let's see what we got. So we covered party era. We got critical election. We've got party realignment, party de-alignment. So divided government is what we have been experiencing since 1968. It is this phenomenon, where our executive and our legislative branches are not controlled by the same party. It is where if I gave you a parallel chart and I showed you who is in control of Congress, like you would see, and it doesn't have to be every part, just like a party era. So, like if you go to Bush 43, okay, so for 6 years, the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate and the White House, and he's the only one. He was the anomaly. And remember, that was 9/11, so I think that has to contribute to a big part of that. But then, like in another part of his presidency, maybe it's only the Senate that they lose control of, or they lose the Senate and the House. Like, it just depends. So that's this idea of divided government. So when you look on your paper then for your next question, the question says, how does ticket splitting contribute to divided government? Do y'all know what ticket splitting means? What does it mean?
It means that you vote for two different parties on the same thing.
Yeah. So your ballot is a ticket. So I vote for a Republican for president, and a Democrat for Senate, and a Republican for House, and an independent for mayor, and like on and on and on. Okay? So you guys talk about that. How does ticket splitting contribute to this idea of divided government? And then I'm curious what you guys think. Do you like this? Is it positive to vote for the person, or is that a negative to vote for the person? And we'll discuss why.